So, hi everyone. Fantastic to see so many people here. I'm very happy for that. My name is Helena Mattsson, and I'm the head of the School of Architecture here at KTH. And it's really a pleasure to open this event tonight with two renowned architects, Bjarke Ingels and Reinier de Graaf from Oma. You will have two lectures first, and then we will have a discussion with two prominent teachers, Maria Papafingos and Helen Ranting. And also we have an excellent moderator, Veronica Heiderlind. This is a collaboration between KTH and Oscar Properties. For us, of course, it means very, very much to have this kind of collaborations with a developer who works with contemporary architecture and with interesting architects that really kind of enrich the urban landscape, both with new schemes and structures, but also that often make projects that come across as provocative. So they also create public discussions, which in itself is important, in fact. So with this, I really want to thank Oscar Properties for making this event possible tonight. And I'm also very much looking forward to future collaborations. So with this, I will give the mic to Oscar himself.
Thank you. It's with great pleasure I'm here. I'm also very happy to see that so many people are interested in the buildings that we created. It's even with great pleasure that we actually are finished with these two buildings now, and nevertheless that most of the people that I've been seeing for the last, let's say, 8 years since we started the project have been telling me that it's impossible to build this kind of houses in Sweden. You can't do it. And I always said, why? Why wouldn't it be possible? But it's basically everybody's been saying, or a lot of people has been telling me that it's not possible. And I love proving people wrong, and I think we've actually accomplished that. Thanks to a great team from Oscar Properties, who has done a tremendous job, and also with the collaboration of Bjarke Ingels and Big and Oma and Reinier. 79 in Park started 2010 when we bought the project. It was very given for us that we wanted to work with Big. It was just the site was designated to be designed by Big. Same as the site for the two towers, Norra Tornen, which we entered the competition in 2012 and we won the competition in 2013. And it was also given that OMA was going to be the architect that was going to work with us on this project. Having said that, I think you guys are here to listen more to Bjarke and to Reinier. So welcome up on stage, Bjarke.
It's on.
Yeah? My loud voice can actually do it without. Also, I was missing the audio in my presentation. So you're gonna have to. I'm gonna have to like sing a few slides for you guys. No, I'm very happy to be here. I was scheduled to come after Reinier, so I was gonna start by making a little reference to my dark past, sitting almost next to Reinier at OMA, I had the fortune of spending my first year and a half as an architect working on the Seattle Public Library in Seattle, obviously, a library that has had such an impact on the city that they have named their mountain Mount Reinier. But what I would like to talk about is the work we've been doing lately. This is what my colleagues look like now. We're located in Copenhagen and New York. This is our Copenhagen office. It's inside a former Carlsberg factory where they used to make the least exciting but very important part of the beer, the bottle cap. And obviously, apparently you need 15-meter ceilings to make bottle caps, which is something we benefit from now. And I'll return to this subject. And of course, I'm very happy to be here because we, after 18 years of practice, we have finally built a building in Sweden. Thanks to Oscar, who called us 7 years ago and asked us to take a look at this like incredible piece of land surrounded by Gärdet Park on two sides, city on two sides. And it became very simple that we wanted to try to make a new kind of neighborhood, a new kind of city block that combines the qualities of the park with the qualities of the city. So we came up with the idea of this sort of a rotated grid, a grid of rooms. The rooms are rotated 45 degrees, allowing views up and down the streets. Passages allow a shortcut across the corner. And then basically we propose to push down the southwest corner, lifting up the northeast corner in return, allowing us to actually flood the courtyard with daylight. This is what it looks like today. So this kind of like sort of a gentle, lazy, sloping landscape. Of course, like you have the gardens along this kind of cascading landscape. You have the oasis protected from the wind inside. Everybody ends up getting a really sort of joyful view over the Gärdet, over the forest, the hills. The landscape is not just visual, it's actually, it has these cascading terraces. Inside the courtyard becomes an oasis open to the sky, dipping down so you actually get an abundance of sunlight. And this is also the home for a kindergarten. For the facades, of course, the facades have different orientations, and we wanted, of course, the zigzagging creates a certain intimacy. Then instead of being like some kind of address in a big block, you have your own little niche. Each balcony has its own little surroundings. It's to sort of respond on the attractiveness of the views and the exposure to the sun. For instance, like from the northeast, it's almost entirely opaque. Even all of the facades are roughly 50% open. It's very sort of distributed to match the surroundings. Also in the courtyard, to avoid vis-a-vis, you get this kind of almost like a shade running across the facade. The closer you get to the corner, the more the nice view becomes the other direction. So here you see some of these situations. And the facade is entirely clad in wood. We like the idea of combining elements that you normally see as opposites. So for instance, the countryside and the city side. Of course, when you go to the countryside of Sweden, and all Danes from Copenhagen have a country house in Sweden, including my parents, and they're all made of wood. So we thought it could be interesting to actually apply this material that you normally see in the small scale actually to the city scale. Sometimes the louvers are turned to allow views for the balconies while retaining the privacy. But of course, from the southwest, it's almost entirely glass, the facade. So basically, when you look at the plans, it's like in all this sort of organic appearance, it's actually incredibly rational. It's like a single module repeated indefinitely. But also as a result, you get apartments that have an almost quirky character. Quite often when you move into a newly built apartment, it's so simple that it's almost like a cardboard box. It lacks character and diversity. Here, like of course, with the access to the outdoor spaces, you can see the steel is actually exposed inside, so you have the quirkiness you find in a loft that has been converted from industry to living, similar to our own office. The sort of the warmth of the light filtered through the wood, and then even a certain sort of verticality. Many of the apartments are duplexes, and some of them have access to the roof through these spinal stairs. So essentially, you end up like inhabiting a sort of a hybrid part of Stockholm that is half landscape, half city. And I think maybe the one image that sort of best presents or captures the intention of the project is this image on a day similar like today, where you can hardly see where the natural landscape, the rolling hills and the forests sort of become the city of Stockholm. And then maybe sort of before I leave it over to Reinier, I thought it could be interesting to run through like maybe some of the subjects or the challenges that we've been dealing with over the last decade and a half at Big. We recently completed the home of Lego, the Lego house. The success of Lego is that everybody thinks that Lego is from their country, but it's not, it's from Denmark. We try to make the house as much as Lego-like possible to make it an interactive, sort of inviting. You can actually climb the roofs on these sort of playgrounds. You can climb all the way to the top. You don't need a ticket. It's really an extension of the landscape of the city of Billund. Inside, you have all these rooms dedicated to different aspects of Lego. It's probably the only museum in the world where you have to touch the artifacts. And the reason that I think Lego is important is that Lego, to me, is not a toy. It's a tool. It's a tool that empowers the child to create his or her own world and to inhabit that world through play and to invite her friends to join her in play and in co-creation of this world. And at its best, that is exactly what architecture should be. That we actually, as humans, have the power to create the world we want to live in and make it a reality. Also, as you know, those of you who are native Swedish speakers, the Danish and Swedish word for design is formgivning, which literally means giving form to that which has not received form yet. In a way, to give form to the future, that you would like to see happen and that you would like to live in. And essentially, I think we try to do this at different scales, at different sort of projections into the future. Some of the projects we deal with are more sort of blatantly dealing with this. We're working with Hyperloop, trying to sort of imagine the future of sort of on-demand, ultra-fast transportation. Among other places, we've made studies for the connection between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, allowing people to travel with supersonic speeds between the two cities, doing in 8 minutes what currently takes at a minimum 2 hours, and hoping to expand this across the entire region. And in doing so, we started speaking with the Ministry of Cabinet Affairs and the Future in Dubai, and they commissioned us to do the Mars Science Center, where we're actually creating a prototype of what could a human habitat look like on Mars in a not too distant future, working with 3D printing, where we use the local materials that are on the site, in this case in Dubai, but also creating this idea that living on Mars doesn't have to be like living inside a tin can. It can almost have this sort of Arabian vernacular quality. The texture of the 3D printing and the warmth of the sand gives it this kind of friendly feeling. Also, to protect from the radiation you have on Mars, the best way to shield the human body from radiation is water is 7 times more effective than stone. So just 1 meter of water that actually allows daylight to pass through can protect from radiation. So just starting to place images and understandings in people's heads how attractive and how desirable a future habitat on Mars could be, using aquaponics, hydroponics, of course, like creating this like lush environment and using it as an exchange of knowledge before we can actually realize the real one, hopefully in a not so distant future on Mars. But sometimes this idea of the future is much more intimate and much more near to what you know. Our first project ever was the Copenhagen Harbor Bath, as some kind of an idea of hedonistic sustainability. The idea that a sustainable city doesn't have to be this kind of Protestant idea that you have to take cold showers to not ruin the environment. If you have a clean port, it's not only good for the fish, it's actually amazing for the citizens living there. You don't have to drive for hours to get to the beach. You can jump in the port in the middle of the city. In Shenzhen, we recently opened the headquarters for the main energy company of Shenzhen. The facade is designed like a kind of pleated dress, almost like an Issey Miyake fabric, which means that it's entirely open, facing away from the sun. It's entirely closed, facing the main direction of the sun. And this simple idea, where of course we can play and increase and decrease the scale of the openings, the main entrance, it reduces the energy consumption with 30%, purely because of the geometry of the building. So in a way, what makes the building perhaps look beautiful also makes it perform beautifully. In Copenhagen, we've experimented with different hybrids. The mountain that combines a parking structure with 100 houses with giant gardens, a man-made mountain. We created the 8 house that creates a three-dimensional community, you can say, where social life is normally restricted to occurring at the street. Here you can walk and bicycle all the way to the penthouse. These two little girls live on the 7th and the 9th floor. They don't have to go down and meet in the courtyard. They can just walk over and find each other. As a sort of architecture, is also an ongoing conversation with the world and with your own practice. For instance, the 8 house in a way inspired a building we're now building in Amsterdam. It's almost like the 8 house upside down. It's basically a city block that allows the port of Amsterdam to extend into the courtyard. So you can actually sail, if you have a good aim, you can sail your sailboat into the courtyard. And as another kind of American cousin, we created Via, which we've called a court scraper, because it combines the density and verticality of a skyscraper with the communal space of a Scandinavian courtyard. The courtyard actually has the same proportions as Central Park. It's only 13,000 times smaller. Sort of a bonsai Central Park, creating an oasis in the middle of Hell's Kitchen. And then maybe sort of the last sort of class of projects is to leave you with one idea. And you're only going to get half of it, because I had a film with all kinds, but there's no sound. And I think to make it like a silent movie would also be really weird. But a notion we've called social infrastructure. And social infrastructure used to be a term that means like how many kindergartens and nursery homes are there in a neighborhood. But we try to mean it much more literally. We all know that a piece of infrastructure, once it gets decommissioned, it can become something else. Like the Tate Modern used to be a power plant. We created the Danish Maritime Museum. It's right next to Hamlet's castle, Kronborg. Kronborg became UNESCO World Heritage, so they had to put the Danish Maritime Museum somewhere else. It used to be inside the castle. So they said, why don't you put it in the dock where they used to build ships? So we thought, what if we sort of, in a way, turn the dock inside out, use the museum to preserve the dock. All we have to do is design 3 bridges, one that stops water from coming in, one that connects to the castle, and then one that gently slopes down into this sort of underworld of the maritime industry. So not only is the space inside part of the cultural infrastructure of the city of Elsinore, also the dock itself with the hard walls and the open ceiling has amazing acoustics for live performances. So basically it has sort of been reinvented to have a new purpose. This sort of inverse Titanic moment. But also if a piece of infrastructure like a dock can become a museum, You can also go the other way. We're building a museum in a sculpture park in Norway that opens next year in Kistefoss outside Oslo. And we could place the museum anywhere we wanted, and we said, so you have sculptures on both sides of the park. So we placed the museum as a bridge, so it becomes part of the journey as you stroll through the sculpture park. You suddenly find yourself moving through the museum and over to the other shore. But when you see it from elsewhere, you actually don't even recognize it as a museum. You can almost see it as the biggest sculpture in the sculpture park. And as a last idea, so since there's these different interpretations, maybe you don't have to wait for a piece of infrastructure like a power plant or a dock to get decommissioned before it becomes enjoyable. With the power of more sort of environmentally progressive technology can actually become so clean that the negative side effects of, for instance, a power plant can evaporate. Our sort of maybe largest project in Scandinavia is in the heart of Copenhagen, right next to Copenhagen Marina. We are building a power plant that's going to replace the power plant you can see on this photo. It's right next to the Copenhagen Cable Park where the locals go water skiing. And it's basically a waste-to-energy power plant. It converts household waste into district heating and electricity. And it's so clean that there are no toxins coming out of the chimney, just a lot of steam. So we thought, like, how can we celebrate this fact? And in Denmark, we have snow. We have absolutely no mountains. Apparently, we have mountains of garbage. So to ski, notoriously Danes have to go to Branes. It's our closest ski slope. It's like 6 hours in a car. And it's not the biggest alpine ski resort in the world, as you probably know. I think no people from Stockholm has ever been there. But we found out that because of the scale of the power plant, we can actually create 2/3 of Branes on the roof of the power plant. We proposed it in a competition. Miraculously, we won the competition, so we had to somehow deliver on the idea. Also, in Denmark won 0 medals in Sochi. We hope to change this now, because now we can actually practice at home. It's going to be a public park, free for all. You can hike in ways you cannot hike in Denmark. You can enjoy the views of the otherwise flat city of Copenhagen. You're going to have the tallest climbing wall in the world, 100 meters of sort of relentless danger. And it's basically creating, together with the city of Copenhagen, a man-made ecosystem. Because not only can we harvest local resources like the rainwater, natural ventilation, natural daylight, but also with the citizens of Copenhagen, it forms almost like an urban metabolism that converts waste into a resource. This was our first vision, and this is what it looked like 6 months ago. It's scheduled to open right after the new year. So maybe we're going to have Swedes coming to Denmark to do alpine skiing sometime in the future. So basically, sort of ending on this, I just think there is a certain point here, and that is that as an architect, you also have this possibility again, like this idea of giving form to the future. That of course we're not manufacturing the future; we are accommodating it. The future is happening on its own, the way people behave. There's always things changing, and it can be like a demographic change, an aging population. It can be sort of a cultural change, people migrating to different places, technological change. New technologies have new possibilities. But whenever the world is changing, the way we used to organize it doesn't fit anymore. You get some cracks in reality, and those cracks become opportunities to give form to the future. You can say that normally you would want to be as far away as possible from a power plant because it's polluting and it's noisy. Now with clean technology, you can actually have probably the most exciting park, at least of Copenhagen, on top of a power plant. And in that sense, architecture is really world changing, because I'm getting my firstborn son in 3 weeks. His name is going to be Darwin. And I find it quite fascinating that he's going to be born and grow up in Copenhagen, not even knowing that there was a time when you could not ski on the roof of the power plant in Copenhagen. And the same is going to be true for his entire generation. So imagine if that is going to be the baseline of him and his generation, imagine how far they will be able to give form and imagine their future.
Well, can you hear me? Yeah. We got off to a kind of slow start, but then it was full gas, right? You said you were going to introduce Reinier, but I'll do it for you.
We kept changing.
We kept changing everything. Everything can change. It's like architecture changing the world. This program can also change.
The world is changing.
The world is definitely changing in all kinds of different directions, not always to the best, I'm afraid. But I'm really excited, shuffling my cards around, looking for the introduction of Mr. Reinier de Graaf. I used to live in Holland. I'd love to practice my Dutch a little bit, but you get the introduction in English just to be on the safe side. Make sure you follow what I'm saying. Mr. de Graaf joined Office of Metropolitan Architecture, OMA, in 1996. He's today one of 9 partners of this highly acclaimed and very influential architectural practice. Mr. de Graaf has been responsible for building and master planning several of OMA's projects in Europe. He's worked extensively in Russia and in the Middle East. And in one of my favorite cities in the world, Rotterdam, he has made his marks by designing one of the city's many skyscrapers, the Rotterdammer, which is described as a vertical village. He has also designed a commission from Rotterdam City Hall called Timmerhuis. He is regarded as one of the world's leading experts on the development of airports and urban systems, and is currently working on the extension of Amsterdam's airport Schiphol and the Hamad International Airport in Qatar. But he's also, or was that correct? No, that's correct. That's good. Well, I'm glad. There's a fact checker here. No fake news.
Nobody can leave this room.
Nobody can leave this room. It's a lockdown. Mr. de Graaf is also co-founder of OMA's groundbreaking think tank named AMO, which he has also directed. And I'm impressed to say that he was recently appointed the Sir Arthur Marshall Visiting Professor of Urban Design at the Department of Architecture of the University of Cambridge. And his professorship there will be really exciting. It starts out I think from your new book, right? Yeah. He's writing, he published a book last year called Four Walls and a Roof, The Complex Nature of a Simple Profession. And it deals, if I've understood it correctly, I've ordered it on Amazon today, and I urge all of you to do the same right now. It focuses on how buildings have become an indispensable vehicle for generating financial returns and the implication this has on architecture, form, and typology. And I think you will be speaking a little bit more about the content of that book. That will also be made into a program at the University of Cambridge. Unfortunately for us, we can have the book, those of us who are not attending Cambridge next semester. So give it up for Mr. Reinier de Graaf.
Thank you. Yeah. So thanks for a very charming introduction. I'm not the reincarnation of Harry Potter. I'm also a father. My sons are 19 and 15. They're named after Roman emperors, just to give you a little taste of how different the talk may be. So I wrote a book about a year ago, and ever since that is basically all I want to talk about. So we'll also not be speaking about the long lists of projects, but I just want to talk a bit about the book and its conclusions, because it might be interesting for discussion later. The book is called Four Walls and a Roof. It has 7 parts. Each part aims to dispel in what in my view is a prevailing myth looming over the profession of architecture: authority, individual inspiration, idealism, professionalism, independence, mastery over the large scale, and progress. While in and of itself, of course, these are good aspirational qualities, there is a flip side. The number 7 of the parts is not coincidental. It refers to the 7 cardinal virtues in the Bible. With a slight change of temperature, can change it to 7 cardinal sins. This is the last bit of religion, and we'll go on. In my view, certain profound changes have taken place from the 20th to the 21st century, which are interesting to analyze more precisely because the 20th century and the 21st century look so much alike. In many ways, the 21st century looks like a reincarnation of the 20th century. And one would say that modernity and the modern project has simply happily continued a second leaf of life in the 20th century. The Vesnin brothers, Savdi, Richard Meyer in Marseille, Corbusier in Newtown, Connecticut, Peter Eisenman in Utrecht in 1924, and Gerrit Rietveld in New Haven. Mies' beautiful large onyx wall. What remains in the 21st century is an onyx wall of a somewhat reduced size for reasons which I can guess you can guess. It goes on. The University of East Anglia, don't know who this is. And I'm going to say some pretty horrible things, but nothing is personal. To prove that, this is Moshe Safdie in the 20th century. This is a building nearby. The good thing of that building is actually that it's not the reincarnation of Safdie alone. It's the reincarnation of many things, of brick without being brick, of the Sirius building in Sydney by Tahoe Gophers. There it goes into the skyline. And in an utterly presumptuous moment, it is also owes a lot of its idea to Kishu Kurokawa. So one could say that modernity triumphed. This is the launching pad of modernity, the Plan Libre by Le Corbusier, launching a whole set of freedoms, exploring the freedoms related to reinforced concrete structure, no longer bearing walls, columns, and a free plan, a free facade. That plan is universal by now. It has triumphed. As you can see here, it's built physically. But the unfortunate thing is that strangely, this is a picture of a Greek website, which is not about architecture. It is about the many tax breaks you can get from leaving a building unfinished. So the modern paradigm actually exists in this day and age as a tax break. And so the triumph is doubly edged. It's very good that there is a reincarnation of buildings from the 20th century, because a lot of buildings from the 20th century disappear. This is the first one, Pruitt-Igoe, 1972, Lyon, Sheffield, Chicago, sort of Einstürzen and Neubauten, Naples, Paris, etc. I could do this all evening, but it ends. Nantes, France again, Belfast, Glasgow, Lyon, Vitry, Glasgow again, Frankfurt, etc. A lot of stuff disappears, so it's good that there is a recycling. It's a form of, new architecture, a form of preservation of buildings we demolish. There is a curious trend going on in the Middle Age. In the Middle Age, we built for 500 years, then in the 19th century for 200 years, and then 50 years. More recently, we built buildings that are supposed to last for about 20 years, and it is not imaginable that time will overtake the expiry date of buildings. So the planning from a prospective activity becomes a retrospective activity. In other words, that you do not plan the construction of a building, you plan its disappearance. It's just a little theory, and it's a theory that, of course, is completely antithetical to the philosophy, a 2,000-year-old philosophy of architecture. This is, well, you know what this is? This is Vitruvius. His main pillars of architecture: durability, convenience, and beauty. And that ethos basically, regardless of the stylistic changes, hasn't changed over a century here. Alberti celebrating the eternal nature of architecture. Ruskin celebrating the fact that buildings should last for more than one generation. And even a contemporary icon like Frank Gehry talks about timelessness. But how apt is that ambition? And how true to the current times is that ambition? Because there are two major trends that currently dominate the world, I guess, and everybody deals with them. Climate change and urbanization. The climate change effect is well known. I mean, if Al Gore is right and you visualize that a smaller part of the world will remain. But there is another inconvenient truth running in parallel, and that is the trend of urbanization. This is again the same world map. This is the Earth's surface. This is the part of the Earth that has more than 25 people per square kilometer, more than 50. More than 125. And this is in a way the megacity regions in which more than half of the global population lives now. It's about 3% of the Earth's surface, with nearly all of its population living there. So the world we know has shrunk. It's in a way an archipelago of megacities. That is one way to look at the outcome of the trend of urbanization. There's one unfortunate thing. Both trends are known, but if you juxtapose both trends, unfortunately, climate change and urbanization means that all future cities will be in the water, protected at enormous costs with increasingly bigger sea defenses. I live in a country that spends 1.3 billion a year on staying above water, and that's only going to become more. So I wonder, what are the consequences for architecture of the trend of this? And is it time that actually the main pillars are re-evaluated? So not durability but temporarity, not a use but essentially a building fit for any use, and a form of discreteness instead of beauty. In other words, this architectural ideal turns into this architectural ideal. It is important that a building can disappear. That's the main architectural quality, is its disappearance. It should be used for what it was not intended to be used for, and essentially should be constructed at any given place, which is in a way a violation of the three direct things. So this is a symbol in London, a converted petrol station in a cinema. It's a big reappreciation of all values. It might also even lead to the reappreciation of a particular type of architecture, of prefabrication, not for its rapid construction, but for its rapid and tidy demolition. This is Marzahn in East Germany. The interesting thing about the demolition is that it's playing the film of its construction backward, and you end up with the same spare parts, collected, shipped, and used for a different purpose, reincarnated in a different type of architecture, considerably more modern than the architecture it replaced. In fact, again, a kind of placeless architecture, an architecture that's easier to move. You can move entire churches. In fact, once you move things anyway, the means of transport and the real estate may as well merge into the same thing. So this is a truck as a house. This is a ship as a house. This is a kind of walking house, and maybe entire cities should walk, which is again a reappreciation of the Ron Aaron thing in the 1960s. But I think by far the most, I think I've lost everybody, no? Okay. Anyway, I think the most interesting revolution of all is the following. This is, I'm told, the Swedish word for real estate, which means fixed goods that stay in one place. So I have a new copyrighted Swedish term. This is lösighet. And the interesting thing about lösighet is the following. If you look at real estate as an asset class, it is the most important fixed asset class to counterbalance the financial system in the world. More than gold, more than oil, more than anything else, our value is represented by real estate. When buildings change hand, like the London, the Gherkin, they triple, quadruple in value. They accrue value in an incredible way. That's part of the reasons why a lot of housing has become unaffordable. So when festighet becomes lösighet, we can perhaps mirror the Foster diagram and in a way get rid of property. Nothing personal here either. These are all Dutch. And essentially The temporary nature of architecture means that architecture should be at the forefront of a new revolution for equality and all kinds of things. This is a project we did in Sweden where we inherited an envelope of a previous architect, which we manipulated into a new form that became these buildings with panoramic windows, a recessed balcony, and the color palette, prefabricated. You sort of get it. Been fixed. The color corresponding to the colors of the neighborhood, obeying the prescribed palette of colors to be used in a system, concrete that looks like brick, but actually concrete that is rough, a building that is rough and things, there's panels, ribs. With brushed concrete, multicolored aggregate pebble finish. And there we go, it's the renders, and the renders look like the building, which is a big triumph in this case. And there we go, up in the distance, and that was what I had to say. Thank you.
Actually, Reinier can stay on stage. Thank you so much. We are going to have a finishing panel discussion. And flanking Reinier and Bjarke on stage, I will invite Maria Papafigo and Helen Rumpting from KTH, from KTH, who will pose some questions. And they need microphones. So I need another handheld microphone, and one of you gets the privilege of speaking on this. Okay, well then, Helen. You'll get me and my tangled hair. And you speak into that one. Okay. And I'll give this to Maria. And Helen, you are a doctor of architecture. And Maria, you are an architecture and a lecturer here at KTH. I'll give the floor to you.
So thank you so much. And I think we're all gathered here to celebrate the two newest additions in the Stockholm architecture scene. And I have to say that both 79 and Park and Norra Tornen are two unique and very exciting projects, even more so for Stockholm. And that they both do so much more than talk about architectural aesthetics and form. And they kind of convey a life that people would like to find themselves living in. And I find that in both of your practices a central theme, although Reinier tried to lead the future of maybe your thoughts in a different direction. But also in the light that Bjarke practiced at OMA, that we just found out, I really would like to see how, do you see yourselves part of the same architectural tradition, or you consider your practices that diverge of your practices? So that's the first question.
I mean, I think they say in hermeneutics that disagreement is parasitic on agreement. That in order to be able to have a critical discussion about anything, you have to actually agree on quite a few fundamentals. And I think, I mean, I can speak for myself. Like, I started studying architecture, I think the year after SML was published. So I literally learned about Le Corbusier through Rem Koolhaas. So in that sense, I think for me and my generation, you can't. I never thought about architecture without having it in the context of Oman. And the reason I went there to work is, of course, like I'm heavily influenced by that way of looking at the world. And I think Reinier's thinking the presentation is quite indicative of a fundamental aspect that I think we all agree on, is that understanding precedes action. That you cannot act in a meaningful way if you don't understand the situation that you are acting in or reacting to. Mm-hmm. So that's why you can't just like have some kind of a dogma or ideal or style that you impose. You have to somehow try to look and listen and try to understand what's happening and how the world is changing.
And your thoughts, Reinier?
Yeah, but I think the fact that we're on stage together happily is indicative of the answer to your question.
I wanted to start my questions by looking at maybe asking a question about scale, essentially. We went to both of the buildings this morning and wandered around with you. And it's clear that both of you have, to some extent, managed to produce very large-scale projects, perhaps not mega projects, but very, very big works here in Stockholm at a time of quite deep anxiety about modernist architecture, about the monolithic, about the homogeneous. And we see this kind of, maybe a reading of them would be that you fragment then the form, you break it down. There's never a moment in any of the apartments where you look out upon the building itself. You're floating in air, seeing the kind of city below. And I wondered, is this kind of anxiety about the monolithic a problem or an opportunity? How are we to deal with the critique of modernism that we see in Sweden? Because it seems that you've come up with two answers at least.
Well, we didn't fragment the building out of any anxiety, as far as I can remember. I mean, but if that helps, make the building more acceptable, I'm very happy to change my story. I think they're not big buildings. I actually think the Norra Tornen projects are two quite small buildings. I think the biggest one is 25,000 square meters gross. That's not a lot for a tower. It's on a tiny site. It's on a virtually non-existent site. So it's not a big building. It's just not apologetic about its appearance. And the pixelization, or the fragmentation, as you call it, it was never intended as a preemptive apology for a modernist building. I mean, I like the fact that they loom large over the neighboring buildings. I mean, in increasingly many countries, and in Britain in particular, a good new building is a building that people don't see. You have the notion of verified views, and then when you see a building, it's like, and when you don't see it, excellent architecture. So excellent architecture, before it disappears in my story, you shouldn't even see it when it's there, which is indicative of the crisis of modernity. So what I like about both projects is that they're very emphatic about their own existence. And they were built, I think both projects were built and designed with the best intentions. And, all old buildings that we're supposed to adhere to were new at one point. And modernity is not something of the present. Modernity is a constant evolution of history, to which even the contemporary, believe it or not, contributes.
Right.
I just have to point out that imagine seen through the eyes of a Danish architect from Stockholm is a very vertical city. The average Stockholm building is 3 floors higher than the average Copenhagen building. So for us, it was almost like an excursion into density to try to operate in a Stockholm context.
Because I'm wondering here, I mean, we are in the middle of a housing crisis in Stockholm right now, and you offer two projects that are somehow systematic, that have a sense that they could perhaps offer models for a broader building project. Would you say that these two buildings could in any way act as a kind of catalyst for a different architectural answer to this need to build maybe for the masses, a more popular architecture that would accommodate the entire population? Obviously, these are catering for a particular market segment, and they're beautiful in their own way. But could we imagine maybe them being the start of a conversation about a broader housing project? Can you save us?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I would be. I would be saying something that wasn't true if I said it hasn't also been, of course, it's challenging to do. Like I think a lot of the things we're doing, and I think this is equally true at Norra Tornen, is that of course we try to be rational and rigorous and effective, get the most use out of in a way to create the maximum amount of impact or diversity through a maximum amount of repetition and rationality. But I do think that, for example, we just opened a social housing project in Copenhagen, and God knows it's very, very difficult to do anything remotely nice with the budgets you have available. But actually, sort of deploying some kind of a mechanism of extreme repetition, but with gentle variations, it actually becomes this sort of organic contribution to the cityscape of Copenhagen. And we actually ended up choosing wooden facades because they're also very cheap. I think the cedar wood we have in 79 Park is maybe less cheap. But essentially, there are some ways that you can actually, and the funny thing is, the social housing in Copenhagen is located right next to for-profit, market rate housing, and looks a lot nicer. So I think it is somehow possible to use architecture and sort of architectural intention and invention to address some of these issues. Like lastly, I just want to say one thing that I am certain of is that within the next, I found a graph recently that shows the increase in productivity measured as the value per employee in the US, in the manufacturing sector, and in construction. And in construction, over the last 50 years, it's pretty much a flat line with a slight sort of gradient towards downwards. And in the same period of time in the US, there's been 160% increase in the manufacturing sector. So that within the next decade, for sure, and probably sooner than we imagine, robotics and sort of an on-site robotics and sort of in prefabrication robotics are going to take a bigger and bigger role in construction. Because like at the end of the day, we've had a lot of sophistication in the way we document buildings. We have BIM models. We can really deliver a very, very exact model to the contractor. But in the translation from data to matter, it then in the end gets printed out and it's done with a guy with a hammer. So the more that translation from data to matter can be a direct translation, the more we're going to see those increases also arrive at construction.
What was the question again? It was about, yeah, I remember. It was about the extent to which I think both buildings could be a blueprint of sorts, although you always have to be very careful with that these days. But I think what both projects have in common, if I may be so presumptuous, is that they use prefabrication, they use modular design, they use a repetitive element, but to create the maximum possible variation. So both are attempts to create the maximum possible variation from the smallest number of elements. And that is a break with, of course, the modern tradition as we knew it, which in a way tried to create maximum boredom from a limited number of developments. And I think even if wealth is there, the important thing about both buildings is that they could be cheap. In different locations, in different circumstances, they could be extremely affordable. And affordability is a function of location and land value more than anything else. So these are buildings. And I think ultimately the difference between good and bad taste is the extent to which you ostentatiously show your wealth or your money. Any kind of ostentatious show of wealth, I think, prohibits anything ever to be affordable in a different things, and it ceases to be a paradigm then. Trump Tower is not a paradigm, even if it goes up anywhere in the world. It is very, very ostentatious. It's the poor man's idea of a rich man. And in that sense, I think both buildings have a certain discretion, and their quality is in the view, their quality is in the terraces, the quality is in the space, which is ultimately an immaterial something. Right. Which is ultimately free, etc. And I think that is, regardless of the role that this architecture plays in the current financial system, it is the type of architecture, should those changes be made, that can survive perfectly intact and retain its legitimacy.
Because this is where we hit maybe the limit of the temporary structure, right? So if we're talking about housing a population, we need to think about something that could stand a long time, that would be durable, that would be dignified, potentially.
Well, yeah, but the fact that you can demolish something very quickly doesn't mean you have to. I mean, it's just, I mean, this was a presentation largely composed for another event to talk about the perils of a country below sea level.
I was there in Tbilisi 2 weeks ago.
No, it was no. That was another presentation.
Have you done this presentation before?
Parts of it, yes. I mean, we recycle buildings.
So yeah, on that note of locality, so you both have two of the world's most leading architectural practices, spanning projects in all different scales all over the world. So of course the question that arises and that you both touched upon is the ties that your work has to the locus and to the specific conditions of each place. And on the other side of the question is how influenced you are from each place. And I think Reinier already showed us a slideshow that had a lot of different places in the world and how they take back experience or thoughts. And I think ultimately, maybe what everybody wants to know is, has Sweden changed you? What are you Swedified by now? And what would be the one thing that you will be taking with you from this experience?
Have you become kanelbullified? You've learned Swedish, I saw.
Yeah. That's about the extent of it. Has Sweden changed me? This is how long do we have? I don't know. I think any place changes you, and I think it's. But I want to talk about something else. It's related.
That's okay.
I mean, context is only very partially determined by place. It's a very common architectural reflex that context is the buildings next to your own buildings. But then context is limited to buildings, limited to architecture. And of course, the essence of context is that it isn't just material. And that you can build different things here than you can build in Indonesia. That you cater to a different organization of the whole building system here. And that I think good design does not just answer to its immediate build context, but also takes into account the specific immaterial ingredients of a context. And it's all about making the right guess what you can do where. And that creates a difference in buildings. And I have to say, the extent to which the Norra Tornen project has been executed in compliance with everything we drew and everything we extended is rare. And in that sense, I don't know whether Sweden has changed me, but I leave with a very, very good feeling.
That's fantastic.
Actually, just picking up on something Reinier said before about just because it's easy to tear something down doesn't mean that you have to. And just because it's difficult to take something down doesn't mean that you shouldn't and you won't. Exactly. And I think I had this kind of revelation. I went like some years ago. I was invited to go to Kurdistan in the north of Iraq. It was like roughly 6 months before the whole region exploded with ISIS. But back then it looked like everything was going to be like fine. Yeah. And so we went up to the north of Iraq. In like north of Iraq, Kurdistan, in the mountains, and we went to this small village where there was a synagogue, and it was 2,575 years old, and it was becoming a ruin. There was like the roof had fallen down, but then I noticed that there was like chandeliers hanging on the wall. They were rusting. They were made out of steel, but they were still somehow there. So I asked, like, when did they stop? When did it stop functioning as a synagogue? And they said around like early 50s, there was like kind of a hostile atmosphere in growing in Iraq against Jews. So they all moved to Israel that had just opened up. And then so it means that it had lasted for 2,500 years plus 25 years. And then just the second it stopped being relevant to the resident population, it turned into a ruin in 2 generations. So the only way, like even the pyramids turn into ruins. In the Faroe Islands, you have wooden houses that are 700 years old. Like none of the materials can last that long. But the only way to make a building last forever is to design it in such a way that it remains relevant to its inhabitants either by a certain accuracy, but maybe more likely by the fact that it has certain qualities that make it endearing, that you're prepared to invent new ways to inhabit this space.
Was this for the parliament competition? Yeah, for the Kurdistan parliament.
No, exactly. Yeah, yes.
We won that competition. but it never got built because kind of bloody ISIS sort of balled it all up, and it's terribly cruel, I think, of ISIS to interfere with our win in the parliamentary competition.
You're both in different ways, I guess, known as architects who have worked very outspokenly with desire, with producing buildings that are seductive, that have perhaps that are surrounded by a world of images that draw us in, that make us want them. I think you've both, in different ways, worked with, I mean, the image has been central to your practice, and this notion that one has to care about an architecture. In some ways, that process of making people care starts well before, the first bulldozer turns up. This is also about the kind of images that come very early on in the projects. And I wanted to maybe ask you about this question of the image, because in the two buildings, and this is to go very far, I think, from the Kurdistan parliament example, and you'll have to excuse me for that, but in both 79 and Park and Norra Tornen, we see an architecture that seems to me to scream for people to take selfies in it. It has, there is a kind of imageability that you would have to admit, I think, is present there. It could be part of the marketing package that surrounds and infuses the project, but has maybe the advent of social media changed how you design buildings?
No.
Because I have to back up this question with a slight confession that in 2014 I did a small study on the 8 House where me and a colleague downloaded all of, this was before Instagram, so it was Flickr, the days of Flickr. The students won't even know what that is, but where we downloaded all of the images that we could find, and there were like, several hundred, of course, and a very large proportion of them aligned exactly with the renders that had been released prior to when the project was announced. And it seemed to me that people were visiting this building in order to maybe recreate the utopian joy of the render, that they stood there in a line with their cameras to take this same image. And I wondered whether this is something that you were conscious of, whether you were deliberately producing this image machine or whether it was just a byproduct.
I think it's a conflation of cause and effect, and I mean, I think
I like that.
I think people have actually, I think sort of for example, we did the Danish Maritime Museum that I showed shortly, and it has, sort of I think like 16,000 portraits of ships, and some of them are, ancient oil paintings. So I think human beings have always captured the world around them with whatever available media. I think what has maybe changed is that each smartphone now has such a good camera that before it used to require a little bit of skill. Now everybody can do it. But I would also say maybe one thing is that, because you started on a note talking about care, because I actually do think that care is a very important aspect. And if it's like we're right now building in Switzerland, I hope to very soon be building in Japan, and these are two places where I really would like to build, because they are cultures where this kind of notion of care is deeply ingrained. Also, for like in Switzerland, it's quite unique in the sense that they still have trade schools. So whereas like in Scandinavia, if you're like, if you're not sort of entirely retarded, you're definitely gonna become an academic. No, but it's like sort of, so and as a result, we're mass educating people into some kind of either unemployment or into being a future unskilled worker, because they're not going to be doing what they actually trained at university. Whereas in Switzerland and in Japan, as I understand it, the trade schools still exist, and people make legitimate choices to pursue a craft and a trade. And that means that you have people on site that are so deeply invested and so deeply professional that they care deeply about how they build and what they do. And I think that's incredibly important, and I think something we should, that I think Scandinavia and probably a big part of Europe has a challenge with, actually.
Yeah.
That's it. I think we're out of time.
Really?
That's
Oh, that went so quickly. I've got like 7 more. All right.
Always happens.
Should we have one last question to end on then?
Yeah, so one last question. I think you talked about formgivning and the future, and I guess it's what... Oh, sorry. I thought as Bjarke I have quite a heavy voice myself. But so you talked about formgivning and formgivning the future. And I guess the question is, how do you think that what role basically these two houses will play in the future of this city? And yeah, as the last note.
Maybe if I go first, time will tell, obviously, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they'll be absorbed as indigenous, and given the prevailing mood against foreign architects, I think that's a very good thing.
Okay.
Thank you. Nice.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we managed to finish almost on time, I think. We would like to thank everyone who came here tonight. Thank you, Bjarke Ingels and Reinier de Graaf. Thank you, the panel, Helen and Maria. And we wish everyone, on the behalf of Oscar Properties and KTH, a very nice evening. Take care, and hope to see you again. Bye.